A recent Oregon 5-star Trey McNutt is a big-time impact in more than one way.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lots of recruiting talk to get to. Film breakdown by our guy Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. That will come here in this first segment. It will come in the third segment as well. We'll talk about whether Oregon's locked up a top 10 class. Lots to get to. But Trey McNutt was, I think, one of the most important players for Oregon to land in this 25 class, Brian, when you talk about the rankings, because they'd had a couple of decommitments. Isaiah Mosey has not decommitted, despite the smoke that went around for seemingly about a week that he was going to. He's still committed to the Ducks. How impactful was that Trey McNutt landing for Oregon to you?
I think it's really big for a number of reasons. Number one, he's just an impact guy, safety or receiver. Heck, he's a really good receiver. I know they don't need him in this class at that spot, but he's really good. And the other thing is you don't find guys that hit like him and cover in combination. It could be a free safety, it could be a cover three corner, and it could be a nickel. In today's age, you need versatility at DB. Trey McNutt is your guy.
You've talked a lot about the geographical reach of Oregon. They're getting kids from all over the place. And Jonas Williams, who we're going to talk about later, could be a future Oregon starting quarterback. He's from the state of Illinois. And McNutt is from Ohio, and DeCorian Moore was from Texas, and they're going all over the place. What does it say as Oregon's going into their first season in the Big Ten that they're able to go into Ohio State's backyard and land a kid like this?
I think it's really unique. Even in today's NIL era, and by the way, Ohio State's got plenty of it, you don't see kids. There's 3 or 4 states you don't really get a lot of kids out of. Alabama, Louisiana, Ohio are the 3. And they're not surprising. Who are in those states? Yeah, it's not hard to figure out. It's just really hard. Loyal fan base. And the recruits grew up fans of those schools too that are state U. It's rare, man. Growing up, there would have been zero chance. Oregon wouldn't have got a visit. I know things have changed, but like to still get it, because Ohio State would have totally taken that kid. There's no doubt. It's still shocking. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Notre Dame get all the kids from Ohio. It's been that way my entire life. That has changed. Clemson's gotten 1 or 2 kids, Bama 1 or 2 kids, but I mean, by and large, it's very narrow. Those kids don't go outside the footprint. That is a huge recruitment for Dan Lanning and the Ducks.
Is it a Big Ten impact where you feel if, let's even say USC and UCLA never left the Pac-12 and that, old league, RIP, stayed together and such, is this one of those names that you think that Oregon probably doesn't land if they're not a member of the Big Ten Conference?
I'm not sure I'd go that far because they were already getting kids out of Alabama and Florida. I mean, it didn't hurt, and I'm sure they sold it as you'll be able to see your kid play some. So with the NIL money, you can fly out to see him at home too. I just don't think travel is as big a deal, and that helps. Or you could make an argument NIL has helped Oregon, aside from the obvious booster that helps the Ducks, more than any other school because they have to recruit out of state. And some of that money is probably going to go to travel, helping the parents get to and from. And there's nothing wrong with that. The Big Ten moniker, I think, helps a little bit with the kids in Ohio specifically. But McNutt is like a kid that was just recruited by everybody. I wonder who he really grew up rooting for, because it still blows my mind that Oregon got a kid from basically Cleveland.
Yeah, and you mentioned NIL. As we all know at this point, that's the only reason Oregon lands any recruit ever. There are no relationships. It just coaching staff doesn't do it. Once NIL is equal, but then it's not equal. Yeah, the contradictions. I talked about that a lot on yesterday's show, so I don't want to get myself all wound up. But I do want to talk about Trey McNutt, and we might address that again later. But I do want to talk about Trey McNutt, the football player, and why he has a composite 5-star rating. He is, by the way, on 24/7 Sports composite rankings, the 4th 5-star of this class, 2 corners and 2 receivers. For the Ducks, Dorian Brute, 2 defensive backs and 2 receivers for the Ducks. What makes Trey McNutt such an impact player by the time his college football career begins?
I think it's a combination of just sheer athleticism. He's God-given, but he's got a lot of football IQ. And like when he breaks on the ball, if he's not going to get a pick or get a hand on it, he knows immediately, and he just goes through the player and tries to dislodge it. How many times do you see a guy miss on the pick and then the kid scores? McNutt is not that. He figures it out. Like the angle he takes, all the little things. He's been coached too. He's pretty polished. But how many 17-year-olds are good at that? Very, very few. DB is hard at a young age. And then on top of it, thumper. I mean, there's a few hits on his film. You're like, oh, there's a parent in the stands that saw that. You know what I mean? So he's the kind of kid that fits Ohio State and Woody Hayes. It's ironic. He's from Ohio. He fits that era. But he could run too. Naturally smooth. Like I said, you could argue his wide receiver film is better than his DB film. It's certainly a negotiation. And it's because he's such a natural athlete. So you can move him wherever you want. And again, strong safety, free safety, nickel, probably play cover 3 corner, and he can definitely play receiver. There's just nothing not to like.
Yeah, and I know a lot of Oregon fans will hear the receiver component, wonder if he goes both ways. And when you have somebody that talented,
no.
I never rule it out. The reason that I am inclined to say no is Oregon's wide receiver class this year and next year, it's so stacked.
They don't need him to. Why risk
exactly? Exactly. That's where I come down on that particular question, because I too was kind of shocked when you look at his huddle film of the number of times he puts a play on there where he's playing receiver, and I'm like, kind of thought this guy was all about the defensive back component, but gosh, if Oregon ever has just a cataclysmic number of injuries there, I guess he could flip over,
get you through. Absolutely.
Yeah, he could get you through. But the positional versatility, I think, is really intriguing because Oregon's going to have a lot of turnover in the secondary after this year. Is he someone who you think is ready to make an impact as a true freshman in the Big Ten?
I think he can. With the depth Oregon has, it's going to depend on who plays where. Again, Trey is a very versatile kid. I don't know what he wants to play. I don't even know what Dan has told him he's going to play. But things change, transfers, injuries, etc. He should look at it broadly. And if he learns the playbook, I can't imagine they really want him playing free safety a lot as a true freshman, making calls. They probably play him closer to the line so there's less responsibility. But, man, I think he could be a great nickel. If he's not, somebody else could, and maybe he's the strong safety. They got to get him in the 2 deep. I think that's the objective for him. Because they're not, that's the Ducks. They're not void of talent anywhere. Somebody can get hurt or transfer, though, and he's one of those rare kids that I think the way he's polished, Switzer, I think he could play pretty early anywhere. Don't be shocked if he started a game or 2 for the Ducks next year.
I wouldn't be, especially given what the safety depth chart currently looks like. Now, you have an entire transfer portal offseason where that can change, but Tysheem Johnson, Brandon Johnson, and Kobe Savage are done after this year. And so there are going to be opportunities. Now there will be guys in that room. Tyler Turner could still be there. Aaron Flowers could be there as well. Peyton Woodyard, who transferred over from Alabama, is a true freshman this year. I don't know if he plays a ton, but certainly he'll be in the mix. It's a position group that more so than wide receiver and even corner specifically, you have an opportunity to play as a true freshman. So if Oregon sees him as ready, as Dan said, says regularly, if you're good enough, then you are old enough. But we've still got more to get to with Oregon's 2025 class. Does Trey McNutt make them a lock to be inside the top 10? What are the chances they get inside the top 5? That is all coming up next. First, though, we're talking about Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for, they've got it. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals ahead of the game or event for select seats. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College with 2 L's in there for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Oregon's 2025 recruiting class on 24/7 Sports had fallen down to number 11 in the country following the decommitments of Josiah Sharma and Deshaun Bray. It vaulted all the way back up to number 6 with the commitment of Trey McNutt. Now, when you look at the other top 5 and 10 classes nationally in this 2025 cycle, Brian, the volume that Oregon currently has is the lowest of anybody in the top 10 by several players, but they have a number of highly ranked guys like McNutt and DeCorian Moore, who are both number 1 at their position, that's bolstering the ranking. Does Trey McNutt committing to Oregon, and based on all the social media postings and whatnot that we've seen, I have a hard time seeing him being a potential flip candidate. Do you think this locks Oregon into a top 10 class?
They would have to lose a bunch of guys. They got too many kids that are 4 and 5 star players. Looking at the guys behind them, Miami's still after a few kids. They could move up, but that's one of the few teams that's in on some of the high-end kids. I will go a step further. I'll be shocked if they go below 8. Notre Dame's in on some guys, but they're probably going to lose Deuce Knight to Auburn. A&M's in on a few kids too. Texas has got a few guys, but I think Oregon, it'd be surprising to me if they finish below 8.
Yeah, I think the class is going to come in smaller than the previous 2 cycles that Lanning and his staff have brought in. Those numbers have both been over 20, but this one looks like, frankly, it could come in under 20 total players. Do you think that is a function, Brian, if that ends up being the case, which is how things are certainly trending, is that just a function of having had successful recruiting classes previously, and also the fact that they've retained a lot of those kids, even ones who aren't starting right away?
I think they're going to be selective now, because if you're going to take a couple of portal kids, you got to allocate the scholarships, and of course this whole new 105 thing, everybody's trying to figure that out, whether it's going to come to fruition or not. But they're being picky. They're going after big fish, and they want to save spots for those guys, and you're not going to over-recruit them anyway. So taking a kid that's a 3-star you just kind of like, while you're still recruiting the 5-star you think you're getting, the 3-star's going to decommit anyway. So being selective is probably right. They'll finish, what do you think, 18 to 20 kids? Probably.
Yeah, last year I think there was at least one commit during the season. That was Aiden Breland. I think there was another one. I can't remember off the top of my head.
At the end, they got the kid from Ohio State that's flipped. So
right, Ryan. Yeah, Jeremiah McLaughlin, and they flipped Ryan Pelham from USC. So that's at least 3 names that I can remember that committed after the month of September. Like when the season was underway or ongoing and leading up to National Signing Day. So if they do that again, then they'd probably be in the high teens. But yeah, last 2 years, 29 and 26 were the sizes of the class. But now it feels like Lanning's kind of established the roster that he wants, and he feels like he's going to keep a lot of those kids, and he can supplement with the portal. And I think that's why he's going with this more targeted approach of, hey, let's just go get the big time kids. We don't need volume. We've got depth. Like, that's what we've built up in the last couple of classes. But this one, it does really seem like they're going after all of the big fish. Also, just a quick note on the 24/7 rankings. Dorian Brew did lose a star ranking. He's now a completely different football player. He's, just not as good whatsoever. And this is actually the 3rd year in a row, I think, that an Oregon player has gone from a 5 to a high 4-star composite ranking and such. But just like real quick, Brian, what do you make of that? What leads to that?
How many hours do you have?
Can you do it in like 90 seconds or less?
Basically, this is a bunch of people in a room because I've been in them arguing about rankings. Literally, that's what it is. And if they're film for a kid, or a kid doesn't practice well, one of the scouts is there, it's random, they drop. It's not as holistic as people think, because the guy that gets to see the kid live will get more say in that argument. If he goes to a practice or game when the kid's not on fire, How's that going to work out for his ranking? It's so random. And then there's the other part of it. Another kid's just on fire and somebody's got to go down. It's just math. So it is what it is. I always know about some of these things from my buddies in advance. They know where a kid's going to end. They'll drop them slow sometimes. They just think the kid's not as good as some other guys that develop later. That happens. Every year it's going to be the same.
So when you look at where Oregon's class is, 6th in the country on the 24/7 rankings, but it varies from site to site, but overall you have a general consensus. Like they're top 10 right now. I don't think anybody has them higher than 5 or lower than 7. It's in that sort of range. But the schools that they are competing with, you've got Auburn in front of them, LSU, Georgia, Bama, and Ohio State has the number one class in the 2025 cycle right now. No word on their NIL, but we'll get to that in just a moment here. Do you think Oregon can climb into the top 5, and what would they need to accomplish that?
They're to the point now, unless some guys decommit from the schools ahead of them, it would be very hard. And like Georgia, I still think will finish number 1 or 2 because they got a couple of really big fish they're probably going to get on the D line. Elijah Griffin, Justice Terry. Auburn is the wild card. Again, I think they're going to flip Deuce Knight. Whether he commits is one thing. Whether he signs is that's a wild story we'll be talking about through signing day. After that, though, Auburn's still on some other kids. It's going to be really close with them. I think it's as much as anything else about who keeps the kids and doesn't lose somebody. Like a Trey McNutt changes his mind and goes to Michigan or something. I don't know. You can't lose anybody because like one point, even adding a 3-star right now will change your ranking. You look at like where 247 has it. It's only a few points for these guys. It's crazy. So yeah, I don't think you can pick exactly, but Oregon somewhere between 8 and 5 is pretty safe.
I want your thoughts on the comment from, I don't even remember the guy's name, and at this point, I whatever. The comments from somebody in On3 about NIL and Oregon and that Dan Lanning and his staff. Did you not see these comments, Brian?
I did not.
Okay. Well, now I'll pull it up because it was a doozy. I talked about it on yesterday's show, and it goes a little something like this. Brent Hubbs of On3 said, quote, "Here's the other thing too. We talk about NIL a lot, right? NIL. At some point when the money's pretty even, it comes down to where you're most comfortable. So you got to go recruit them. I think Oregon is learning this, right? Oregon just kind of had the process of, we'll just go buy us a class, and they've lost 3 or 4 commits because they don't really want to work and live in Eugene. And I don't think the coaches have relationships with those players that other schools have." That's the gist of it. Is that your take on Dan Lanning and the recruiting trail and the rest of this staff?
I can't comment exactly on how I feel because I would be fired. Dan Lanning and his staff recruit very well. Let me be very clear on this. And I remember doing this January at the Under Armour event. Aiden Breland, McLaughlin were there. Off the record conversations, and I gotten to know them, etc. They picked Oregon. They could have went wherever. They're both national recruits. I said, how much was NIL? Both of them in separate interviews said that, it was part of it, but like McLaughlin said Ohio State offered him more, and he still flipped. So if you have a bad relationship, I mean, surely he would go to Oregon, right? The kid doesn't know me from Adam. I'd turn the recorder. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
So that's garbage.
Ohio State offered more NIL. Where are the shots at Ohio State? They're kind of
there's
quiet,
a few
quiet nowadays.
For the portal, but
there have been a couple, but there have. I'm just talking about like shots taken at Ohio State, or the perception that coaches or media people try to paint around. Well, they're just buying players and whatnot. Like it's the Nike
because
thing.
Of Phil Knight. It's easy, and look. It is what it is.
It's the lowest hanging fruit.
Oh, it absolutely. But here's the thing: in the history of college football, it has never even been remotely uneven. It has been completely teeter-tottered up and down. There's about 5 to 8 schools that are really different, and then about another 8 to 10 that are pretty close to that. And then there's everybody else. That's it. It's not going to change. So if you
And
don't
that
wanna
and
get
that's
into
what
the
the
money,
and that's what and that's how it's kind of always been in recruiting. That's how it is with NIL too. Like, yeah, Oregon is a tier 1 school. They're not the only school investing tens of millions of dollars in NIL into their rosters. They're not the only one. I thought Lanning's comment on the Pat
Texas,
McAfee show
Ohio
was
State, a bunch of them do it.
Lanning's got a bunch of great sound bites and quotes out there. One of my favorite ones. Yeah, it's amazing Kirby Smart brought in the #1 class without any NIL. Like, that's crazy, man. like this is just not the way it works. But again, as I've said, I think Oregon is an easy target. I've got one more question for Brian, and then he's going to break down someone who absolutely could be Oregon's starting quarterback one day in Jonas Williams. That's coming up next. So, Brian, we talk about the recruiting success with Oregon and the NIL and all this sort of stuff, but how much of an impact, really? I had a couple people send me this question for you. How much of an impact is the Big Ten making with Oregon essentially locking up, barring a decommitment, another top 10 class, which would be their third straight, pushing for a second straight top 5 class? They brought in the highest ranked class in program history in the 2024 cycle. How much, give a percentage, let's say, is attributable to Oregon is in the Big Ten and they are viewed even more as a power player and a major brand in college football?
I'd say it's another 10%. If you add 10% to where Oregon was, that's formidable. So they're going to be playing in front of more eyeballs. They're going to be playing in front of more recruits. And quite frankly, they're going to be playing in front of more media. All those things matter. So 10% might even be, well, it might even be 15%. So if they, like, hypothetically, if they beat Ohio State in the regular season, if they lost to them like the Big Ten championship game, like they come out and they show they can compete in the Big Ten right away, which I think they will, absolutely, then it just solidifies it. You'll see more kids like Jonas, who we'll talk about in a second, at least entertain going to the University of Oregon. I think that it will help their brand. Again, they recruit nationally anyway. Now they're going to be in front of some more of those kids more often. How would it not? And the Big Ten brand is massive anyway, so that also helps.
Jonas Williams, 2026 4-star quarterback from Frankfort, Illinois. Is that do I have that right? Yeah, Frankfort, Illinois. Look, I could pick out Illinois on a map. I don't know about Frankfort specifically though, and this is kind of what we're talking about, where you go and pull a kid right out of the Big Ten's blueprint, or the Big Ten's footprint rather, out of their backyard. Here he comes to Oregon for the 2026 class, and yeah, it's still really early, right? Oregon hasn't even finished up the 25 cycle, but one of the first commits they had in this 25 class was Achilles Smith Jr., and having that quarterback committed early has led to maybe the best recruiting year for Oregon at the wide receiver position that we have ever seen. So I like that they've got the quarterback early, and they're going to have to keep recruiting him, of course, but I think this is a guy who, when I watch his film, I say, yeah, I can absolutely see him being Oregon's starting quarterback one day. It's a long ways away, of course, but I can see it.
I'm not worried about when it is. I worry about watching the film, and then you just wonder if the kid will be patient enough to wait. Jonas reminds me a little bit in style, I'm not saying he's the same player, of a certain guy that now starts for the Houston Texans. So I know that's a big ask. He was the second pick of the draft. CJ was a great player and all that.
CJ Stroud, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, like, I don't even like to say it, but like immediately that's who he reminded me of. Pretty good mobility in the pocket. If he wants to take off, kind of like CJ did in the game against Georgia in the playoff, he had a bunch of big runs, and he never did it before, really. And he killed Georgia in the game with running the football. He can do that, and he's probably a little faster, but his release and his natural motion, like, Illinois doesn't produce a ton of quarterbacks. This kid is one of them, though. He's got the arm. I've seen him play live. He's naturally looking football player. He's got big frame. He's going to weigh 225 pounds. He's got all the attributes you're looking for, and he throws the deep ball well. That always helps, Spencer. That always helps a lot. So
it certainly doesn't hurt. And I know that's music to the ears of Oregon fans who, for a roughly 4-year stretch, didn't see a whole lot of deep shots in the Mario Cristobal offense. And I think this is a guy that can push the ball down the field. I see that, and I love the CJ Stroud comp. I think it's sharper than the one that I came up with, which was a more mobile Dante Moore. their releases look kind of similar. I don't know if he can do all the different arm angles.
Yeah, Dante's very advanced with that.
Yeah, like Dante is kind of Matt Stafford-esque, where it's like, oh, he's got a guy in his face, he's just going to submarine it down and still throw it
Great
accurately. But when I watch Jonas Williams throw, the similarity I see between him and Dante is the speed and ease with which he gets rid of the ball. It is a quick motion. It's not a Darren Thomas, big wind up. Even Herbert was a little bit more of a wind up kind of guy. I see that from him, but when you watch him throw, when you watch him play, what do you think he has to improve upon the most to be a starting quarterback for the Ducks someday?
Probably the same thing that most kids do. It's the end all be all. It's a very boring answer, but a very complicated one at the same time. Post snap reads. And I have no idea, and he doesn't either how to do that yet. He's seeing cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. Until he sees cover 3 pre-snap, and then it rolls into cover 1 with a guy coming in the hole and stuff like that, and he's not seeing that in high school. We won't know. That's why quarterback is almost impossible to project, even from college to pro, because it gets even more complex, because they've never went against it before. But if he figures that out, he's an NFL player, because the arm strength, the size are there. And the key in the NFL, you're not going to go 4 and 5 yards all the way down the field. You got to hit shots. If you look at like drives that predict scores in the NFL, that's what you got to do. And he's already doing as a sophomore in high school. He could throw it down the seam and hit a real line drive shot, and then he'll loop one. He understands touch with a level 3 ball. That's not normal for a kid that's like 16. So good for Jonas. He's been coached, but he has the arm talent and the size to make those things happen. And he can run if he really wants to.
A fun thought experiment, I'll get out of here on this, is, his primary recruiter is listed as Will Stein, of course. That's Oregon's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Will Will Stein still be there when Jonas commits in 2026?
I wouldn't know, but I mean, everybody loses their coordinator in college now.
Well, but that I think is a valid question to ask. Is, if Will Stein is here in 24 and 25, but then gets a head job somewhere ahead of the 26 season, does he go to Jonas and say, "Hey, do you want to come out here, start as a true freshman, and be, a rebuild like that?"
Wyoming or something.
Yeah. I mean, players follow coordinators all the time. That's why Dante Moore originally decommitted from Oregon, went to UCLA, because Dillingham left. That was his guy. That was who he talked to. That was who he knew. And he went to ASU, and he didn't want to go to Arizona State. So things have a way of working themselves out in the end, no matter what. But generally, when I have a thought here on the show, I just kind of share it, because you never know what can happen. And that's the arrangement that we all have here. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, appreciate it as always.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for making this your first listen or first view of the day. Make Locked On College Football your second. I'm hosting over there as well, keeping you up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, it is available. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.